What's up, YouTube? What is going on, everyone? It is December the 2nd, 2018. We all know what that means. The year, no matter what you have going on, is coming to an end, whether you want it to or not. Those of you that are just tuning in for your first time, welcome to the somewhat weekly lawn and garden show. This is the 1 hour live stream I try to do every week. I do better some weeks than others, especially during holiday season. Things get a little crazy. Plus, with the shift in career, it's been a little over the top here recently. So, to everybody that's new, big welcome aboard the Soul Train. All right. For those of you that don't know, I like to give a little bit of an intro. So, real quick, before we get deep into the intro, I just want to say, if you haven't, be sure and check out the website, see what we have going on in the ethosphere. If you have been there, then check out the Instagram. Some pretty interesting things going into the Instagram world. If you're not into the Instagram thing, I suggest you go catch out the one thing that everybody can get behind that will make them happy, and that's cupcakes. And if cupcakes don't make you happy, something's wrong. So go check out that one cupcakeplace.com. My buddy Jay Pink over there doing some snizzle. And if you get tired of the cupcakes, I recommend you jump back over for a little bit of a Lizaf over at Real Old Dad. Because if you never check them out, he'll make you laugh prancing in Ranger panties. And then when you're done with that, go check out some custom things Chris Helms over with Appalachian Turf is doing. He's got some funny things going on over at his channel. Now that I've got that out of the way, I move on to the next segment of the show that we all call Roll Call. So I will hop on over to the chat, see who's here. Say hello to everybody. GG Turf, what's going on, my man? Eric Von Waddell, how are you, good sir? Michael Moore, he cried, more in the shows. Grady Brown, how are you, sir? Not sure I've ever seen your name. Your first time, welcome aboard. You've entered another dimension. Gravy Lookout, how are you, good sir? Way up there in the North Dakota. Who's your daddy? I'll tell you who's your daddy is. It's Who's Your Daddy Landscape. That's what's up. C.D. Andrews, way over there in Greensboro, North Carolina, programming. Scott Reich, Jeffrey Hurd, there we go. There's a first timer. Welcome aboard. Glad you're here, sir. May your adventure into the grass factor world be satisfying. Sun 420, how are you, good sir? Josh Sales, Brandon Reinschmidt, way over from Charlotte by way of Vermont or Connecticut or somewhere all the way down to Florida, but we don't need to talk about the Florida part of you now, do we? Aaron Watkins, how are you, good sir? Gary Evans, I'm glad you're here. Phil Cagle, I'm glad you put the perennial ryegrass down and you're enjoying it and your family's enjoying it and you get to get some action out of it. That's what I'm talking about. Picture perfect lawn maintenance. There he is, PPLM, Chili Dog. Way up in Richmond, Virginia. I will see you tomorrow right from the airport. You better be there, Jimmy, or I will kick your earth. The lawn care notice here. Everybody give a Sunday salute to Alan Hay, lawn care nut. Glad you're here, sir. Steve Wright, all the way over in Indiana. How are you? Good. Steve Williams, not Steve Wright. I misread that. I'm getting all squirrely over here. Watch you for my new TV. Feel like you're in the room yelling at me. Maybe your volume is too high. No, your volume isn't too high. I'm definitely yelling at you, Brandon, because this is the way I talk. I appreciate it, son. I appreciate it. Shane Brady in the house. My Irishman friend. We're covered in snow. Winter is now here to... Oh, man, I hate that for you. Already. My goodness. Gene Ducati Club. How are you, good sir? Getting nasty on that motorcycle all around town, are you? My wife is wandering the living room looking like she's a little bit confused. So I'm just going to check and make her feel a little bit awkward with a couple of questions. Is everything okay over there, baby? All right, just making sure. You want to come join me? Okay. She said no. Lakeland, Florida. Floyd Epperson, how are you, good sir? American Troy, good to see your name again. All right, non-mastery productions. There you go. There you go. All right, all right, all right. So for those of you that are just joining in, the way this typically works, it's a Q&A format. You ask questions. Typically, I try to provide answers. I can't answer every question, but there's lots of things that we can tackle. I tend to approach lawn care from a more theoretical approach with a little bit of back understanding, at least from my experience as a lawn care applicator over the last decade. So I open the chat up, open the floor up. Do you have? Throw them in. How can I answer you? How can I help you? That is what I am here for, is to help you be the best that you could possibly be. All right, now let's jump over. Kevin McCarthy, look at this. Had to bust out the snowblower this morning. My goodness. SS to the TLN. Don't know what that is. What is going? Tony, tell me. How are you, good sir? How are you? Scott Wright. This is a good question. I think this is a good. Casey Turner's in the house. What's up, Casey? Good to see you, sir. All right, Scott. This is a pretty. This is a great segue into this conversation here. How often will I want to apply Carbon X on turf type tall fescue? Okay, Scott, here is the issue in hand when it comes with that. First off, I don't know where you're located, so it's going to be hard for me to give you just a full generalized answer. Okay, but the first thing you want to keep in mind is how many pounds of actual nitrogen do you want to apply through the course of the year? You have to look at turf type tall fescue as it performs through the growing season. You have typically a surge of growth I see that, Alan. I see that. You have a surge of growth in the spring. It tends to die down during the summer, and then you get a surge of growth in the fall. Now, how much it dies down in the summer typically depends on where you're located. The further north above the Mason-Dixon line you are, typically the less it will slow down during the summer. The further south you go from the Mason-Dixon line, typically the slower it will slow down during the summer. So in terms of actually how much you want to apply or how often you want to apply a Carbon X, it depends on your growth cycle. If you are in a nitrogen intensive time of the year, again, spring, fall, that is when you want to apply your Carbon X. If you're in a period of suspended growth or delayed growth, stunted growth, abnormal temperatures, abnormal soil temperatures where you may be too high or too low, then you may want to stay away from it. So I will tell you exactly how I apply fertilizer. In it, I front load the back end. So starting in September, October, November, that stretch, I typically apply fertilizer pretty heavy. So I may get down 2 pounds of N there in the fall. And then in the spring, I'll put down like quarter pound, half pound, something like that, or 3/4 of a pound, 3/4 of a pound. So it all depends on how many pounds of actual nitrogen you anticipate getting down in your season. Now, what I do that some people think I'm crazy for is that I do not typically apply any substantial amount of nitrogen. So anything over 1/4 pound, really anything over like 120ths of a pound from May through August. That time frame is just very little, slim to none. And typically, I will try and focus on things like mitigating disease, making sure irrigation systems are dialed in, all the other extracurricular activities that can come in. That may be a good time for some high rates of RGS. That may be a good time for a little preventative disease control. Ben from Lawn Tips last night was talking about using a phosphiter, a phosphite. Phosphite may be a good thing to apply if you're worried about the potential onset of pythium. So there's lots of things you can do even though you're not applying nitrogen. Micronutrients, it's a good time that you can apply then. Again, it's going to be all about mitigating stress. What can you do to mitigate stress during that time frame? So how often will you want to apply? Again, it comes down to your pounds of N. But if it were me, and I was using Carbon X in my own program, I'll tell you how I would do it. I would backload it, I would front load it at the end of the year, and then dial it back in the start of the year. So, and then during the summer, I would do different things. Any issues with applying calcitic lime in the winter? I'm thinking the freezing and thaw cycles will incorporate it into the soil better. GG Turf, I like your idea on that. In fact, I think that's a good thing to do. Again, it all comes down to surface area. Lime is going to have the greatest effect when it has the most surface area availability in the soil. So if you think about using like a powdered lime, right? Powdered lime is typically more effective than like a prilled lime because it has a higher surface area. Or if you're using something like a fast-acting lime, I believe that has to do, I've been going back and forth with Ridge Runner on how exactly it works. Still can't dial it in exactly on how it works, but looking at the patent of it and stuff, we think it has a little bit to do with surface area and how much water you can retain to it to neutralize those hydrogen ions in the soil. So I like your idea of doing it when you plan on doing it, GG Turf, that's for sure. Liquid iron, any benefit applying it during winter when the ground isn't frozen? CD Andrews, it depends on if you're actually having top growth or not. So if you're going through a period where you may be experiencing freezing temperatures that may damage the blades of grass, liquid iron isn't going to do anything to push out that damage. So you can apply it and it may darken the grass, but if you still have frost damage or freeze damage at the tip of the blade, it's still going to be apparent. So in my opinion, is there any benefit in applying liquid iron during the winter? No. You said to give TLN a Sunday salute. Oh, that's right. That's right. Let me hop up on here. Pounds on the ground. That's what I'm talking about. Carbon X every morning on cereal. There you go. All right, here we go. I use it for power steering fluid. Did you ever use ethanol as a surfactant? No. And Thomas, I'm going to address this because I had a screenshot sent to me on a forum, I believe it was called aroundtheyard.com, where someone had talked about using one of my recommendations for applying glyphosate. And part of that recommendation, they took from the surfactant video where I used a citronella candle oil as an example of a crop oil concentrate. And I wasn't doing that saying literally use ethanol or a tiki torch fuel as a surfactant, but I was doing it as a comparison because it contained petroleum distillates, right? So because I'm saying petroleum distillate, ethanol is not a petroleum distillate to begin with. So anyway, if you see that surfactant video, please do not take those examples I use to heart. You can use shampoo as a surfactant. That's pretty well known. But please do not go pick up some tiki torch fuel and think that is a good choice for a surfactant. Also, do not go pick up any moonshine or high octane ethanol or alcohol and use that as your surfactant. That is not a good idea. Aaron Watkins says, my soil samples came back 3400, recommended 3.5 pounds per 1,000 in Newport, News, Virginia, Hampton Roads. That when should I apply it in spring? How often do I apply this? Okay, Aaron Watkins, first off, that recommendation on your soil sample is a generic across the board recommendation based off what turf type you present. So if you submit a soil sample and you mark that you have turf type tall fescue, it will recommend that you apply 3.5 pounds of 3400 per 1,000 square feet. You might have a little bit of a difference where it says, for instance, if you have really high pH, say you have a pH of an 8.0, they may recommend you apply 2100 at 4 pounds or 6 pounds or 7 pounds per 1,000. So do not pay attention to your nitrogen recommendations wholeheartedly on soil samples. 9 times out of 10, they're generic and garbage, absolute garbage. So 3400, I assume they're recommending ammonium nitrate for some reason. Maybe something with the ammoniacal form, maybe something with the nitrate form. I don't know what grass you're attempting to grow, but I would not apply over a pound of ammoniacal nitrogen from ammonium nitrate in a single application. To me, that is garbage of a recommendation. However, if you do want to do something to jumpstart you, you can apply something like a 2100 ammonium sulfate, where you still get 2 nutrients there. You get ammoniacal nitrogen, plus you get sulfur from a sulfated source. You can apply that, assuming your pH is above a 5.5 at 2 pounds per 1,000, and I think you will like the results just as much. You're not applying as much nitrogen. And it's a safer application overall because over 1 pound of N from ammonium nitrate is hot, hot, hot. So that will back down. It'll give you a much less risky rate, and you will still get a very significant color bump from it. Aaron, if you want to email me your soil test specifically, you can at thegrassfactor@gmail.com. I would love to take a look at it and give you a more precise recommendation. Let's see here. Whoa, we jumped to the bottom. Let me get going over here. We got to talk about December 11th. I don't know what they're talking about. Okay, any benefit to applying high rates of liquid iron to fescue in the summer to keep the color when soil pH is low and there's a lot of Fe already in the soil? Brandon, it's one of those things where, again, it depends on the rate of growth you're getting from your fescue. So say you still have a little bit of cooler temperatures. Maybe you're at 85, 86, 87 during the day. You've got ample soil moisture, and you've got decently reasonable temperatures, sub 70 at night. Your disease is under control. Then, yeah, you can apply something like iron to hold your color. Now, again, you're in that period there where you're on the borderline of peak stress. You're above the stress level, the genetic stress level of that stress tolerance of fescue. So if you're shooting for color, make sure, one, what's most important is that your soil moisture is correct, because if you do not have correct soil moisture, no matter the amount of iron you're applying is going to have any effect. Whether you're using EDTA chelation or EDPHA, I made that up, whatever chelation, your chelated form of iron that you're using, it's not going to have the effect you want if you don't have enough soil moisture. So, yes, if you're looking purely for color and you need to apply chelated iron and you have ample soil moisture, then by all means, you definitely can. The benefit is that you, now I would stay away from the term high rates of liquid iron. If you've already got high rates of liquid iron, why continue to apply? And you already have a lot of Fe already in the soil, why continue to apply it? What you can do is focus on your pH at that point. So maybe make that shift and do some good soil remediation, whether that be through lime or whatever, to help unlock some of that. Now, a lot of times that iron may be locked up in an oxide form where it's not going to be available. So maybe at that point, you could shift towards running maybe high rates of humates to attempt to have that chelation effect. So there's a couple of different ways to go around it. It's kind of a blanket statement, is there any benefit? No, but if it meets the purpose that you're trying to serve, in this instance, you have an event coming up or so on and so forth, then yeah, you can do that. But if it were me, probably what I'd be looking to do is do a little more soil correction to get your pH where it needs to be. Let's see. Hey, Matt, why would the lower half of my turf-type tall fescue blades of grass have no color, while the upper half to 1/3 is still green? I'm in Cary, North Carolina. Thanks. It could. Okay, first, it may have something to do. Ridge Runner, I see you. I don't know. It doesn't grow great right here. It does on the underside, but it's also blonde right here. You can't tell, but at one point it had blonde hair, and so it kind of hides what action I have going on right here. Okay, chances are, Gene, you're dealing with young blades of grass. I'm assuming, or you're dealing with density where not a lot of light is getting down through the canopy. And if you're not getting a lot of light down through the canopy, you're not going to have a lot of chlorophyll in those lower sections to be drawing in that sunlight to produce your carbohydrates from photosynthesis. So your green is going to hang around on those upper blades where the chlorophyll is necessary to convert that sunlight into energy for the plant. And they're going to be pretty smart about that. It's like how when a branch that gets crowded out by bigger upper branches will seemingly die and drop off. Well, it's because it's not sending enough carbohydrates back to the root system, and so the tree can basically cut it off, right? Because it's not necessary. Same with the turf grass. If it knows it's getting the most amount of carbohydrate production from the tips of the grass, there's no point in having a whole bunch of chlorophyll stuck in limbo throughout the entirety of the plant when only the top half or third of the leaf blade is actually what's producing food for the plant. Okay, okay. Let's go here. Hey, Matt, does using growth regulators on Bermuda reduce its water needs? Chris, there's anecdotal data that shows it potentially reduce its water needs. However, I have not seen that. You may stove off a little bit of the onset of stress, but it's not going to be in a very noticeable fashion. While it does suspend upward growth, the lateral growth still remains the same. So the plant is typically using the same amount of energy. Now, with the thickness of the cell walls that may occur, you may get a little bit of a decrease in transpiration. However, I've yet to see anything that says definitively, at least in my experience, that it's saving on water needs. What does Carbonex smell like, and when will it be available in Cologne? If you would like, Grady, I've got some soaking in alcohol right now, which makes a great carrier that I can shoot to you. It smells like a cross between, like it has a tinge of chicken manure with a nice ammonia smell. Because you got to think about the different inputs that are in it, right? So ammonium sulfate and some chicken litter and some biochar, but the biochar, it kind of hides and masks that smell of the chicken litter. I'll give you an example. I have a bag of it in my car right now, and you can't tell that there's chicken litter in the car, but you can definitely tell something's in there that smells like fertilizer. Pretty interesting. Mike Rapini, what is going on, man? I appreciate you. I'm thinking of using a PGR on my lawn next year. How early should I apply it, and for how long? Live in Michigan, have Kentucky blue. Right. Thanks, Chief. All right, Mike. So as a general rule of thumb, you want to get it applied before you start experiencing your surge growth. So as you begin to break your winter dormancy, get it down. It's better to be a little bit early than to be a little bit late. So you should apply it early, and you should continue to apply it until you begin to enter your period of stress or disease, assuming you don't plan on fighting your disease preventatively. Because one thing to keep in mind is that you're in Michigan, you may not have to deal with it a lot, but if you do get disease on a growth regulated turf grass, it's going to take a really long time for it to recover. So you want to apply it and do everything you can while applying it to make sure there will be nothing foliarly discoloring your turf type. Because if it does, again, it will take a long time to grow out. You're always putting grass clippings back into the soil. How much of your nutrients are being put back into the soil? About half. Brandon, we have to think about it this way. I don't think it would be as high as half. Because a lot of the nutrients that are going to be applied are going to be converted into different forms. So it's going to go into the production of lipids. It's going to go into the production of carbohydrates. It's going to go into the production of amino acids. Different pathways and functions of the plant are going to cause it to basically form a new chemical composition while in the plant. So it's not exactly a 2-to-1 type of return that's going back into the soil. But I think you could say safely over the course of the year, maybe you could recycle maybe a ½ pound of N. I think that would be an accurate statement. I'm sure the data is out there. I don't know off the top of my head, Brandon. Matt, how much do you mulch the tree leaves? I try and mulch the tree leaves until I begin to capture accumulation at the soil. If it looks like it's beginning to crowd out the grass, then I would say you're mulching too much. But I try and mulch as long as I can. And it's mainly for no other reason other than the fact that I'm too lazy to blow them. My T-jet nozzles, when twisted into the check valves, are not parallel to the boom. Defective quick cap nozzles. Okay, so Mike, they typically will have an offset, and that is so that way the two spray patterns are not touching and then dropping, right? So when they overlap, they should overlap like this. They should not touch. So that's why you will see a slight over twist on your boom nozzles, and that is perfectly normal, and that is ideal, what you want to have happen. Let's see here. Let's see here. I think, yeah, that's right. They're offset. What up, William Poole? 901 in the yes. What's up? What's up? What's up? John T just got back from Dollywood. That's what I'm talking about. Hopefully you got to meet Miss Dolly Parton. RGS seems like a good product based on everyone's recommendation, but I don't understand the science. Can you break it down for me, Barney style? Yeah, Gary Evans. Okay, so there is, I always cite the study that was performed by Virginia Tech, and it had to do with biostimulants. So what they did was that they took a series of biostimulants and put them through a test on different, mostly on golf greens. And I think it was either, I think there was some Kentucky bluegrass in there, but there was also, for the most part, bent grass, which would be a cool season grass. And they monitored the performance of it. And so the way RGS works is that it is a mixture of sea kelp and also humic acid. And what this study showed is that the combination of those two products had a synergistic effect that led to increased root development. Okay, so yeah, that shows that, but why exactly does that happen? Okay, the kelp is known for having high amounts of growth regulators in it. And I'm not saying growth regulator as in an ability to retard it, but we're talking about plant hormones that can affect growth. So when you look at cytokinins and gibberellic acid, I'm drawing a blank. My goodness, it's been a long day. Anyway, when you start flooding the plant with cytokinins, man, I cannot remember. And what happens is that you put the plant into a state that will focus on root rather than production. And also the flood of cytokinins can also increase the plant's ability to fight senescence. Senescence is the internal ability of the plant to fight aging. So we think about like how when you spray crabgrass with quinclorac, quinclorac will stimulate senescence in the crabgrass plant. And part of that senescence is that the reason why it turns purple, it's basically artificially aging that plant, right? So it would be the exact opposite that happens when you apply something that is, a high flush of cytokinins, is that you turn on that stimulus effect in the plant to fight that aging process. And putting it into that state of regenerative repair, it ultimately will cause the pushing of the roots deeper and deeper, assuming it has the ability to work its way deeper into the soil without a significant amount of resistance. So check out that study, and one of the things you can note on that is the different humic acid and sea kelp products they use. So check it out. Let's see here. I put down ammonium sulfate on November 1st. We have had good 50 degrees. Should I put down more in December? Probably not, Ronald Parrish. That's not to say you may need to, but probably not. 50 degrees, if your soil temperatures are 50 degrees or less, you probably won't have to worry about it. 2 pounds of ammonium sulfate on renovated turf-type tall face lawns. Now, I put down some lime, but nothing crazy. pH is probably 5 to 6. If you already got down 2 pounds, yeah, I would go ahead and put it down, and I would go ahead and get crazy on the lime if you're at a 5 to 6. Reload that. What are your thoughts on glyphosate-tolerant turf? Example, Provista. Chris, for something like St. Augustine, I totally get it because there's not a lot of options on turf like St. Augustine as far as post-emergent weed control. So The difficulty will be as more and more weeds become tolerant to glyphosate. It's a little late to start bringing about the development of glyphosate tolerant turf types, in my opinion, because as you see what happens now in the farm world is that they're having to go in and reformulate dicamba, for instance, because glyphosate alone isn't enough. Now, the benefit is that for something like St. Augustine that is dicamba tolerant, is that you now have an option to be able to run glyphosate in conjunction with a kicker like dicamba and be able to broaden your spectrum of control. So I think it is a good thing. Now, the problem is that if you start introducing different Roundup tolerant turf types, and what if they move into the same area? How do you control one over the other? Now, the advantage of something like St. Augustine being glyphosate tolerant, if it begins to move into your Bermuda grass and you try and spray it out with Roundup, it's no problem. You don't have to do that. There's plenty of selective herbicides out on the market that will allow you to control St. Augustine in Bermuda grass. Is potassium acetate all that? Robert, it's another potassium source. So if we look at it, I want to say, oh, I did it. Potassium chloride and my goodness, my brain. Give me just a second here because I am not on all cylinders, apparently. Fingernail polish is ethyl acetate. Okay, so usually this is going to be a high pH and low pH type reaction that produces. If we think about like sulfuric acid and potassium chloride, you'll get some you'll get some sulfate of potash there. So it's another form of potassium, basically. Is it going to be all that? Probably. I know it is very efficient in being taken into the plant, so you get a lot of utilization from it. You can force a lot of it into the plant. However, is forcing all that potassium into the plant going to change the outcome? According to the University of Nebraska, no. The plant is only going to take up as much potassium as it needs based on the rate of nitrogen applied. So you apply 1 pound of nitrogen, you're only going to get 1/10 of a pound of potassium uptake. This is not real world numbers. I'm just throwing that out there. So you can try and force it into the plant with something like potassium acetate. Does that mean you're going to get a greater overall performance from it? Again, according to University of Nebraska, no, you're not. It's just you're dealing with a tissue sample that has a higher instance of potassium. Now, the caveat may be if you're dealing with something like Kentucky bluegrass and dollar spot, and studies show that higher tissue samples of potassium show decreases in instances of dollar spot, then you may want to consider doing something like that. However, again, when you're dealing with dollar spot, that's typically during periods of high nitrogen uptake. So you can apply a 1-to-1 nitrogen to potassium ratio of fertilizer and get the same effect. So is it worth the money? In my opinion, absolutely not. Can you still experience disease in turf pile fescue in fall, early winter? I'm in the Charlotte area and seeing some yellowing in my blades. Yes, you can. If you're in the Charlotte area and you've had frost or freezing temperatures lately, that's probably the yellowing you're seeing. However, helminthosporium, leaf spot, melting out, all of those are cool season diseases that you typically see in that shift from summer into the fall. Let's see here. Look at this. I'll look at all these people over here in North Carolina. North Carolina is holding down the house. Auxins. Thank you. I kept wanting to say phenols. I'm thinking phenoxy herbicides, and they're a synthetic auxin. Thank you, Turf Man. Thank you. Carbon X working good in high pH soil. Yes, it will, because of the ammoniacal nitrogen in it. So it has a fair amount of ammonium sulfate. So yes. However, if you're dealing with high pH soil, Carbon X is not the end all be all. It is not going to fix your high pH soil. You need to do things to correct your high pH soil. So keep that in mind. Focus on remediating your high pH soil, but no, Carbon X will play alongside with that. Best time of year to apply RGS for tall fescue in Zone 7, North Carolina. See, dude, typically you would want to apply it leading up in a period of stress and then coming out of your period of stress. So maybe that time period from March or April into May or June, and then dial back and resume September into your cool period. Hi, Matt. What can I put down on Kentucky bluegrass in perennial rye mixture in Michigan to prevent brown patch? And then should it be applied? Ken, when you're dealing with in Michigan with brown patch, so this is probably going to start in you for June. So maybe mid-May or the 1st of June, begin applying a strobilurin fungicide. If you want to mitigate your opportunity or potential for the development of disease resistance, then you either want to alternate or apply two classes in conjunction with one another. So for instance, I talk a lot about my preference of running azoxystrobin in combination with propiconazole. Those two together seem to get me my best results. So I would start that then in June and continue to apply it monthly until you're out of your potential pressure, until your disease pressure has dropped. Will you bring Carbon X Roadshow to PPC Total Turf Labs? Yes, Paul, I can definitely do that. Carbon X be Gene, that's funny. You're welcome, Rob. You're welcome. Put some RGS in the white. If I attempt to mow my turf type tall fescue at 2 inches next year as an experiment, how should I change my turf plan other than more water and mowing more often? Okay, so I've been thinking about this a lot because I was watching G-Man in the Discord. For those of you that have never been to the Discord, I recommend you jump over there. Maybe someone can post a link to the Discord in maybe somewhere. I've got a link to it. I cannot find it right now. My goodness, I have really messed that up. Maybe this will work. I don't know if it'll work or not. I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the chat and we'll see what happens. Okay, so I saw G-Man talking about that, and this is what I would think is that you have to, okay, so we have to approach it from the sense of, how do you maintain, Brandon, that you should be able to relate with this, how do you maintain bent grass, right? So you're going to have to spoon feed. So it's going to up your frequency of applications. With turf type tall fescue in our area in the transition zone, I would stay away from growth regulator just for the potential for disease flare-ups. Until you begin to learn the kind of ins and outs, I would hold off of it for a year, and I would try and fight things with fertility for as long as I possibly could. So I think the goal would be extremely strict and highly malleable approach to watering. I mean, you've got to be able to act quickly and not set it on a program and forget it. And then I think the other thing would be you would have to be way more preventative in terms of each individual stress pattern weather-wise that you're going to face. The other thing too is if you're surrounded by trees, I would nix it out and probably not even consider it because you think about on turf type on bent grass. I'm sorry, even in the transition zone or further south, you'll see the big huge fans to maintain air circulation. So I would think, this is just thinking out loud, would be you have to maximize that airflow in order to mitigate some of that disease pressure. Now, the other thing too would be you probably have to undergo a little bit more syringing, and also you may want to do things to mitigate dew in the morning. So rolling the lawn in the morning, or running your hose over it or whatever, just to knock it down. Okay. Hang on, we jumped to the bottom here. Let me jump back up. Hashtag get your soil right. Southeast North Carolina. Look at this. Look how North Carolina. My goodness. I'm experimenting feeding a few fescue lawns, quarter-ish pound of N every 2 to 3 weeks. Is this a stupid idea? No, Paul. I don't think so at all. I don't think there's anything really wrong with that. One thing to keep in mind is that as you begin to enter the cool period, forcing nitrogen into the leaf tissue of the plant. I think G-Man or Ridge Runner was talking about this. And there was actually a guy back on the lawn forum. No. This was on Lawn Site way back when. I cannot remember his name. Skipster, Axwell, something like that. We were talking about this, and one of the arguments is that by having all that nitrogen in the tissue can cause stress. What was his argument? Small Axe was his name. And his argument was it had something to do with the depletion in the root system because of the force into the plant. And I didn't get super deep into it, but it had to do with just the damage that would take place to the leaf tissue, the inability to photosynthesize. I believe that's what it was. I can't remember, man. It's been many, many years. But where you are, Paul, you're not facing as many freezing temperatures as we are here. You know, we've already dipped to 20 degrees so far. So I don't think it would be as much of an issue for you where you are as it would be for me where I am. What herbicides can be used on dormant Bermuda? Many herbicides can be used on dormant Bermuda. Assuming it's fully dormant, you could pretty much run the gamut. So one of my favorites on dormant Bermuda is glyphosate in combination with a three-way. That is one of my favorite things to run on dormant Bermuda because it just works well. There are varying rates that you can run of glyphosate on dormant Bermuda. NC State did a great study on the impact of glyphosate at 3 or 4 different rates after it began to green up. So we're talking about 25% greened up and moving forward. Some of the newer products that you can use on the market are like SureGuard. SureGuard is a long-term pre-emergent / soil sterilant that rates can be reduced, applied earlier in the fall, later in the fall, early winter, that will carry you through till green up. The other thing that you could use if you just had a wild hair, Diquat. You can spray Diquat on dormant Bermuda. One thing to keep in mind is that if you're using a non-selective herbicide like Diquat or glyphosate, is make blanket applications, because with spot spraying, typically you'll see a delay in green up where you spot spray. So in the event you're going to use it, make sure you're making blanket applications. Is there a too soon period in the spring for fertilization? A lot of people recommend spring pre-emergent have minimal fertilizer value. I would say if your ground is frozen, Gary, it's too soon. And the reason being is that it will not work its way into the soil where it could be taken up by the roots, right? And so what happens by applying it to frozen soil, you're basically forcing it right down the drain. So is there a too soon period? Yeah, and typically that deals with frozen ground. However, if you're not frozen, then not necessarily is there a too soon period, because on warm days, it's going to begin to be taken up. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is I'm assuming when you say spring fertilization, you're talking about nitrogen fertilization. Make sure you're cognizant of your nitrogen source, right? So if you're applying an organic source or a water-insoluble source of nitrogen, a wind source, water-insoluble nitrogen, WIN, that relies 100% on microbial activity to mineralize the nitrogen content in that organic fertilizer. That is not going to happen in cool periods. Your peak performance on that is going to be when soil temperatures are over 55 degrees, consistently increasing until about 80, 85 degrees of soil temperature. So Pay attention to your nitrogen source. Ammoniacal nitrogen is going to be readily available. Nitrate nitrogen will be readily available. Urea nitrogen will not be as quickly available as an ammoniacal or nitrate source because it has to react with the enzyme urease, and that reaction isn't going to take place very quickly in cool weather. Questions on pre-emerge. I watched the video on your fear of pre-emerge granular. Have you found granular to be less efficient? Roy and Thana, I had a very public breakdown. GG Turf, you will have to contact John Perry on that. I had a very public breakdown on YouTube over the granular pre-emergent. Once I did my first round as granular, I did my second round as liquid. I had no breakthrough this year, and I had a pretty difficult general. So, I think mostly it was a psychosomatic thing. I'm sure there's some validity to it, but when we're talking about residential lawn care versus golf course type turf management styles, it's probably not as severe of a detriment that it could be in super high performance turf. So there we go. I also watched the video on pre-emerge with the 10 acres account where you put out prodiamine liquid. Do you just hope for rain to water it in? How essential is that watering it in? The most essential part is watering it in. So when it comes to scheduling something like that, I am the weatherman. I'm going to make sure I'm going to get rain within, you can't tell in that video, but rain was on the horizon. Like it was going to be there within 24 hours. In fact, I think it was there within 18 hours. And I chose to spray it on that day because I knew rain was coming. Prodiamine, dimension, pendimethalin, any of our labeled for residential lawn pre-emergent herbicides are 100%. Their effectiveness is 100% determined by its movement into the soil profile. There's no other way to move it into the soil profile other than with water. See, dude, hey, thanks, man. I appreciate that. What is your general rule on spraying herbicides on recently seeded turf type tall fescue? Mow 2 times. Not always, Brandon. Typically, I pay more attention to temperature than anything. If we have temperatures over 72, I will hold off until it's been mowed 2 times. However, if it's come up and it hasn't been mowed 2 times, and temperatures are sub 72 or sub 70, then I feel comfortable going ahead and spraying it. And when I say sub 70, I'm talking about the high temperature for that day or that week or until it gets rained in. I'm not going to spray it. So if it was this time of year where we have fluctuations anywhere from 68 down to 20, and say the grass is a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch tall, I feel comfortable spraying herbicide on it. Let's see here. Thank you, Ken. Wolfpack all the way. The research farm, the most of their tests are conducted is less than 5 miles from my home. Oh, that's awesome. Lawns really can be shade tolerant. Masood, okay, this is really, there are different turf types of Bermuda that are coming out that are showing more tolerance to shade. It doesn't mean it's shade preference or shade preferred, but it's showing more tolerance. The two of those, there goes Chris, Tiff Tough and also Tiff Grand were the two that were most shade tolerant. Again, don't expect perfection. If you've got 2 big ass oak trees on either side of each other and you're trying to grow Bermuda grass in the center of them, don't expect it to do well. It will thin no matter how tolerant it is. You may keep coverage, but it will be thin. So yes, there are new varieties that are being marketed out of Tifton, Georgia, and what they're doing is that they're taking different base plants of Bermuda, like I want to say Tiff Sport. This isn't Tiff Tough, but Tiff Sport was developed through taking radioactive cobalt and blasting mid-iron Bermuda, and that's how they made Tiff Sport. So they're doing lots of different genetic things to alter the performance of Bermuda grass for sure. Different pre-emergents can be applied within 1 to 2 months apart. Yes, Masood, they can. However, one thing to keep in mind is not all pre-emergents build upon the previous application of pre-emergent. So let me tell you a little bit of what I mean with this. And when you are dealing with, say, for instance, you go out round one with prodiamine and you put down 0.6 pounds of active ingredient per acre of prodiamine on that first application. Then your next application, you go out with dimension, and you go out with dimension at 16 ounces to the acre of dimension. Those two do not complement each other. So it's basically like applying two half rates of pre-emergent, not as a split application, but just two half rates. So you still only have a half rate of pre-emergent down. And this is the main fault I see from applicators that are losing their lawns to breakthrough. Just because you're using two pre-emergents of the same mode of action or the same chemical group doesn't mean they have a compounding effect. So for instance, the other part of that would be if you applied 0.6 pounds of AI of prodiamine and then 1 to 2 months apart apply another 0.6 of prodiamine, then you will have 1.2 pounds of active ingredient prodiamine down to the acre. That will have a compounding effect. If you do 16 ounces of dithiapyr followed by 16 ounces of dithiapyr, that will have a compounding effect. That will give you your duration. If you do 16 ounces of dithiapyr and you plan to only get a month or two control out of it, you do 0.6 pounds of prodiamine and expect to get 2 to 3 months of control out of it, that's going to be all you get. It's not going to build that duration. So yes, you can apply different pre-emergents, but understand what their mode of action is and understand that only the same chemical AI is going to have the same compounding effect on the same chemical AI. Mixing AIs isn't going to give you a compounding effect. How are you incorporating Carbon X into your business accounts next year? GG Turf, I am no longer an applicator. I have made the transition full-time into fertilizer manufacturing, and we also just secured a very large lease on some land to be doing farming and research. So I am moving purely into research, farming, and manufacturing. However, what I will be incorporating Carbon X into other businesses next year will look like this. In round 1 and 2 and round 5 or 6, and then round 7 would probably not be Carbon X. It'd be something simple like ammonium sulfate. That would be for cool season grass. If you're dealing with warm season grass, it would be like round 3, 4, and 5, something like that. Maybe 3, 4, 5, and 6. It all depends. Tyler, if you want to shoot me your program, I'd be more than willing to go through it with you and give you my best recommendations. Do you have any experience with it, Tyler? That's thegrassfactor at gmail.com. Do you have any experience with painting dormant Bermuda? Yes, Chris, I have tried to use Endurant turf paint on Bermuda grass. I didn't have a lot of success with it, but I learned after the fact that I was doing it wrong. What I did learn, the correct way to do it is to use something like a JD9 gun to make your application. So we're talking about high volume, very small droplet size, almost as small of a droplet size that you can get to apply it. And it requires a very high rate of turf paint. Because you got to think that how much of a lack of a canopy that Bermuda grass will typically form, especially if it goes dormant and then you cut it off to give it kind of that golden hue. You cut off all those dormant leaves. There's really nothing for that paint to adhere to. So typically you want to make sure you have as much dormant leaf area at the surface as possible. Make sure you're using a very, very, very small droplet size, so pay attention to wind because you can turn anything green for a really long period of time. And make sure you're using high volume. So high rate, small droplet size, high volume. That's right, the lawn stripe. Matt, I see on LCN's channel, he cited his back over the glyphosate-resistant St. Augustine. Do you foresee more companies developing glyphosate-resistant type grasses? Probably not AAA Huskers, unless they have the financial backing to be able to continue to put it out. However, most of the research and most of the money is going to be put into agriculture and not turf type. St. Augustine and Florida was chosen for a reason. Florida is one of the largest turf, quote unquote, residential or leisure or luxury turf items or turf areas. That, Florida is its own little entity. There's a lot of money there, and there's a lot of lawn care there. There's more lawn care in Florida than there is the rest of the Southeast. So that's why it was developed for there. Will you see it in cool season grasses from probably warm season grasses? Probably not, just because there's not enough money in it. Most of that genetic research and genetic manipulation will be pushed more towards agriculture. Holland and Saul, what's up, man? It was good meeting you too, sir. Glad to see you here. No different AI per emergent. Thanks. Concern with total issue. Yes, you can apply it. If it's the same one, definitely. You can do it a month or two apart. You can do it 2 weeks apart. We're going to knock out clover and ivy this winter and spring here in Nashville. Dark 35, Zero Dark 35. Nice name, by the way. What I would recommend is something that contains a 3-way herbicide that contains like 2,4-D, Mecaprop, dicamba, and run it in combination with the kicker. So you could use something like triclopyr. Triclopyr ester is a great kicker. And the reason being is that ester-based herbicide will work to penetrate that leaf tissue even in cool weather. So if it were me, I would run a full rate of a 3-way herbicide. So we'll say you're using like triplet SF at 1.5 ounces per 1,000 square feet. And if you're using a triclopyr source like Turflawn ester, I would apply that at 3/4 pound, 3/4 ounce, or even a 1/2 ounce, or even a 1/4 ounce. Do you have to occasionally wear a suit to work now? No, Brandon. I'll tell you what I do wear to work is lots of shorts. During the summer, I wear flip-flops. During the winter, whatever I grab. I'm not going to be a typical sales guy in the industry, because that's not who I am. There are many topsoil composts, etc. Which one needs to be used on where? Nowhere. You don't need to use them anywhere, because typically they're all, for the most part, not very good. I've never seen topsoil sold as topsoil that actually perform very well. Most of the compost I see that are sold as compost are not actually compost. Compost should have no odor whatsoever. If compost has an odor, it's bad compost. You don't need to use it. Topsoil is a gimmick. It is always a gimmick because there's no viable business model that will allow you to spend the years to generate the topsoil necessary to be able to come in and scrape it off. So they're taking it out of like woods or anywhere they're clearing for new development. And is that good topsoil? It's debatable. It's probably okay. It's probably not great. So anything you can use of organic matter, incorporate it very. I wouldn't be super liberal about it. I would take a very calculated approach. I wouldn't be trying to apply 1 inch on top of already existing grass. What I would try and do is work 1 inch into a renovation. If you're desperately concerned about CECs or something, then take just a general organic fertilizer, aerate the absolute fire out of it, apply it at an extremely high rate, and that will give you basically the same top dressing effect from an organic fertilizer as you would get from a compost or a topsoil. Again, I did a video called the root cycling effect. I would pay attention to that because as long as you can get any sort of vegetation established, you can turn that layer of soil into topsoil as fast as you can by using something like applying a topsoil or a compost. Ty Miller, are you going to offer a seller running your products this year? Yes. I'm not going to say which ones and when, but yes. What can I do to help my Bermuda spread? It doesn't seem to like spreading like you guys say. Currently using Milo, Central Florida guy here. Also, does my Bermuda go dormant down here? Love your channel. Thanks, Eric. Central Florida, it may or may not go dormant. Maybe not. If it's not spreading like people are saying, then something is wrong. first thing, just because you're using Milo doesn't mean that's always the right thing. So what I would do is I would pull a soil sample for first and foremost, because you're in Central Florida, you could be dealing with a really high pH situation. And it's not that Milo is going to hurt in that scenario, but it may not be your best option for that scenario. Other thing too is that you may be off the charts in phosphorus. And so applying more and more phosphorus is having a point, you've reached the point of diminishing return where ultimately you're causing your Bermuda grass to thin instead of thicken, because that can happen with excess phosphorus. So I would pull a soil sample, take a look at what you're actually working with in your soil, and then build a program from there. Because under no circumstance should Bermuda not be spreading like we are saying it does. Because that's the whole reason it's used in turf manager programs all over the nation. What is up, GCI Turf? Will TLN spray enough Roundup on his new grass to give it? I don't know. Any suggestions for weed control on the field of the Orange Bowl? Buddy, I don't know, Toby Howard. Transition zone, turf type tall fescue, core aeration in spring and fall, overkill. Yes, it is overkill. Spring core aeration in conjunction with pre-emergent bad. Yes, it's bad. Probably the pre-emergent too deep with something like a core aeration, so I wouldn't do that. There's no point in you to do it in spring and fall. You're dealing with a residential lawn. If you're running into issues with things around that, again, if you want to core aerate in the fall, a good heavy. I mean, there's so much you can do fertility-wise to overcome compaction than aerating in the spring and fall. Now, if you had a reciprocating tine aerator or you're backfilling with sand after you aerate, then say, yeah, you can do spring and fall. However, typically with spring, transition zone, turf type tall fescue, you will typically dry out the soil more than you will help fix it. So I'm not a big fan of spring aeration. Some people do it and do it well and have good success with it. Other people don't. Hey, I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely send me my program, Shane, thegrassfactor@gmail.com. I'd love to go over it with you, man. Scott has a website up mentioning Provista. Much info there yet, but could be interesting. Yep, it's probably if Scott's is going to run this, Scott's is probably going to run it through because they got the patent on it and they're going to make as much money as they possibly can. What is a Pete? Get your timing right. All right, everybody. It is 10:02. I am going to call it. I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. I'm traveling over the next week, so I will be on the road. But hopefully I'll be able to record lots of videos when I go see PPLM up in Virginia. And then I'll be going to Dallas to go meet with the Parks and Rec Department in Dallas, Texas. So again, everybody, I really appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much for supporting the Grass Factor. Be sure to show some love to all the other lawn care YouTubers that are out there. Pete with GCI Turf, the Lawn Care Nut, Real O Dad, Andrew Gillespie's Non-Mastery Productions. All my friends out here, just thank you for everything you do. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the support you've given me over the years, and especially now that I have entered this period of my life. So thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. Good night.